Hi, everybody. Today we have this new episode of the Unheard with the great Dr. Sandal from Kansas. So, hi, Dr. Sandal. I'm really happy you're doing this with me. It's really great.
Happy to be here, Lisa.
First of all, could you maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your specialty and what you do, and
Sure.
more about your clinic too?
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Neela Sandal, Dr. Sandal. I'm an MD who practices integrative and functional medicine. And I think a lot of people wonder a little bit what that means. At its most direct or succinct, what we do is we focus on solving the root problems that manifest chronic health. So we're always trying to figure out, how do we do medicine better? I see integrative and functional medicine as the natural evolution of medicine. I'm sure that a lot of your listeners have the experience of talking to mainstream medical practitioners and feeling that something is lacking.
Mm-hmm.
Integrative and functional medicine is very much trying to get back to filling in that gap. How do we do genuinely good medicine for individuals, not population medicine, not statistical medicine, not generalized medicine, but Lisa medicine or Neela medicine? What does this person need?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not uncommon, for instance, that we end up thinking outside the box. We want to figure out for this individual what has been missed by the system. How do we dig deeper? How do we do better? That's really the heart and soul of quality, functional, and integrative medicine. I started a clinic in my hometown in Lawrence, Kansas, 8 years ago now, Opma Clinic. And we have a thriving business now, I'm happy to say.
Great.
And we get to help hundreds and hundreds of people from all around the nation. We're in the US. We are open to global clientele as well, but mostly we focus on people who are national. And the most common story I get from my patients is, "Hey, doc, I just came back from Cleveland Clinic and Mayo, and nobody can figure it out."
Yeah.
And in 6 months, we have them typically better. I'm not a miracle worker. I'm just a scientist. I'm just a healer in the old sense. And my job, as I see it, is just to connect with individuals and help them be empowered to find their own health again. And we just work the science. We iterate until we figure out what's going on. We're bulldogs like that.
Oh, great. Well, it's really nice to hear. I think a lot of people I've been talking to have this issue with feeling dismissed and feeling rejected by the doctors in general, whatever the specialty is, or if it's their GP, and they just feel really really dismissed. And every time they come up with a solution maybe they found on the internet or something they were researching, they have this sentiment of not being heard and not being listened to. So I think you're on the other side of the spectrum, trying to have a real good discussion with the patient and conversation about how they are feeling and what their journey was before they came to you. And so it's taking
Exactly
the
right.
person as a whole then, and that is
Yeah.
it's so important. Yeah.
I think a good general heuristic for the quality of a practitioner is, how do they react when you tell them, "Hey, doc, I just did my own research and this is what I think is going on."
Mm-hmm.
They should be very excited. They should love that you are engaged in your health and trying to work on this. And the reality is, as we live in an increasingly decentralized world, there's a lot of really good information out there
Mm.
that MDs are not exposed to.
Yeah.
Again, they're generally really busy people. They think rather linearly. They've got a sort of guild dogma.
Mm-hmm.
And so it should be valuable to any scientist to have someone come in with novel ideas.
I
You think they'd
more
be thrilled.
and some additional data to bring.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wanted to know, because how long have you when did you start practicing medicine now? How long has it been?
I've been practicing medicine for, oh gosh, I have to start doing my finger math here. It's been over 10 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, what,
So
12, maybe 12 years?
you do have some that you can see the difference maybe and the evolution between 10 years ago and now, especially
Yeah.
regarding autoimmune illnesses and chronic illnesses, because there has been a huge increase in the past 15, 20 years. So
Yeah.
how did you experience that with the patients? Because you probably see a lot more patients coming in today.
Yeah. Well, when I started my practice, so I went through a residency program like all MDs do, an apprenticeship. And my apprenticeship was a little bit unusual because I knew that I was interested in functional integrated medicine to begin with. So I went to study with Dr. Andrew Weil, who kind of founded the
Yeah.
concept of integrated medicine. And so I did a combination program in family medicine, very traditional, and integrated medicine,
Hmm.
very alternative.
Hmm.
And so my experience was maybe a little bit different than many practitioners. But when I first graduated out of my apprenticeship, my residency, I did do a conventional practice for about a year and a half. And eventually I went, okay, I'm going to go crazy. I have to get to my roots and do the thing that I actually want to do. And so that's a whole journey of, starting a business and, I hope it goes well and gradually, being very blessed. Um, but while I was in conventional practice, one of the things that I learned is that most MDs turn a blind eye to all of this. If you asked most MDs who have a conventional practice, you're like, well, how have things changed in the last 10 years? You're going to get some really not satisfying answers,
Hmm.
some blow off answers. They're going to say, well, our science is advancing.
Hmm.
Like, okay, yeah, but what does that mean? And if you ask them a question like, well, what about the rise, the increase in autoimmune
Hmm.
diseases, or the increase in autism, or the increase in Alzheimer's, or the increase in inflammatory bowel disease? They might say, well, that's not my specialty. I don't really keep up.
Yeah.
Or they might say, yeah, I've heard that's happening. But very rarely are they going to be proactively engaged in trying to figure out why this is happening.
Hmm.
The reality is that a lot of physicians nowadays are much less scientists and much more tradespeople.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're like, well, I went to trade school, I got my trade kit, and I practice the thing. And yeah, I do my continuing medical education within my specialty. If I'm
Hmm.
a cardiologist, I stay up to date on the newest cardiologic drugs and these sort of things. But the reality is that our medical tendency towards hyper specialization means that people really get in their lane and stay in their lane. We don't have a lot of innovators. We don't have a lot of outside the box thinkers.
Hmm.
A cardiologist is typically very bound up. All their time is spent just trying to keep up with the cardiologic data.
Yeah.
And so, what do they know about Alzheimer's? Like, yeah, I guess I heard that it's coming up.
Yeah.
So, I personally find it very fascinating that we don't have many MDs who are really trying to think outside the box and answer those questions.
Hmm.
Now, in my current practice, not being in the conventional side, but being in the progressive side of medicine, I have a lot of opinions about that because I see that all the time. And my job literally is to answer those questions. Why does this person have Alzheimer's?
Hmm.
What were the multivariate things through the course of the last 6 decades
Yeah.
that led them here and how we walk those back?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm happy to dig into all of that because personally, I find it fascinating. That keeps me having fun.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's really when you start seeing not only it was something I touched upon with quite a few of the people that are chronically ill that I've been talking to, is that they often have the feeling that only the symptom is being treated and they are not being treated as a person, and so they the day they have their appointment with their GP, or they come into the
Mm-hmm.
office, they sit down, they say, well, today I'm feeling this and this and that, and they feel like only the symptoms are being listed, and there is no real um deep research into,
Engagement.
sorry.
Engagement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
engagement, to find out what could have been something that maybe happened 10, 20 years ago, that could be that where the symptom could be the result of that. So I've been
Yeah.
going into also some mental health discussions with all of those people, and how it's really quite astonishing how much trauma they have all experienced in their lives.
Mm.
There must be some connection done with the patient and more engagement in that regard, to have a real look at the life that person
Yeah.
has led. And because it's really, it can be, I think, connected because our mind and our body are intertwined.
Right. Yeah, human health is incredibly complex. This is really the primary topic that we talk about on our channels.
Mm.
Um, we have a YouTube channel where we try to create quite a bit of material around this, helping people unpack all of the complexities of health. And you're exactly right. Not only are the mind and the body intertwined, they're not separable,
Yeah. Mm.
right? It goes that far. And, so people are kind of into this trendy phrase like mind body connection. It's like, no, no, no. Further than that, the mind and the body are the same thing. You cannot, there's no connection. They're not separate things
Mhm.
that can be connected or disconnected. And, this is, I think, commonplace in the East. In Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Indian medicine, and traditional Chinese medicine, they understand this in a really, really deep fashion. And so, while they're thinking about physiologic health, they're simultaneously thinking about what we in the West would call mental health
Mhm.
or spiritual health or
Mhm.
psychological health. I called my clinic Atma Clinic after the Sanskrit word for the total person, the mind, the body, and the spirit. Because what we all want to do is we all want to have a robust self. We want to be a total person. We want to have our Atma be whole and full and robust and empowered. And you're exactly right. I think that much of our modern medical system is essentially falling apart. I think it's an active disaster zone.
Mhm.
Most physicians are so harried that they just do the thing. And you're exactly right. They're focused on the symptoms because that is what they can solve with a pill.
Yeah.
Why do they focus so much on disease management rather than disease resolution?
Yeah.
It's because that's the dogma. That's what they get trained in.
Yep.
And also that's what the system it pays for. It's what they have time for.
Yep.
And so naturally, if we're constantly focusing on disease management, we don't really resolve things. And then those things accumulate. We have a disease that's managed. Well, that's fine, except then another disease shows up as we go along our life, and then another,
Yeah.
and another. And all of a sudden, I don't know about how you guys are doing in France, but in the US, it's a disaster. There's this phrase polypharmacy,
Yeah.
multiple pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
And the number of Americans who are on over 10 pharmaceuticals is absurdly
Yeah.
high,
Yeah.
disastrous.
Well, also, I wanted to touch upon that because I think there's also you can, tell me about what you're experiencing, but I think there is quite a massive increase in multimorbidity too. So people who have, who are layering up different illnesses, and especially with chronic illness. And
Yeah,
this is something I've seen with all of the people I've been talking to, is that often uh, they probably started with one main illness, and because it was misdiagnosed or it wasn't treated at
yeah,
that time, then they just started piling up different illnesses and different pathologies, and so they end up being 30, 40, 50, having 3, 4 different diagnoses, and being pharmaceutically treated for all of that. So that's
yeah.
also probably a case, some part of the problem is that misdiagnosis, and not having people, not treating the root issue,
Right.
also brings people to that situation where they're taking tens of pills a day.
Well, there's kind of an important, if you'll forgive me, philosophical layer to this.
Mm.
When we think about misdiagnosis, most typically what people mean when they say that is they say, you thought that this person had an infection with Borrelia, Lyme,
Hmm.
when in fact they had a infection with Rickettsia, another
Hmm.
tick-borne illness. And oh, that's a misdiagnosis because we missed the Borrelia. And like, yeah, that's definitely a misdiagnosis, and that can definitely lead to the wrong treatment, and that can be problematic. But when I say philosophical, I mean that actually misdiagnosis happens way more often, way more commonly than that.
Mm.
To give you an example, let's say that someone goes into their doctor's office and their doctor says, "Hey, I see that your blood pressure is elevated." And the typical protocol, or it should be at least, I've seen this, 2 times in the past, 3 times in the past. I think we really should medicate you.
Mm.
Now, is that the right diagnosis or is that a misdiagnosis? Well, it's true. Yeah, it is hypertension. They do have high blood pressure. But I would challenge that that's actually a missed
Yeah.
diagnosis.
Mm.
Why do they have hypertension?
Yeah.
Don't just put them on medicine and say, well, great, you're good. I diagnosed you and I solved the problem. No, that's a misdiagnosis or
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
misdiagnosis.
yeah, yeah.
The hypertension has a root cause. And if we don't chase after that, then guess what? They're stuck on lisinopril or whatever their drug of choice is.
Yeah.
And that doesn't get better over the course of time unless we figure out what the root is.
Yeah.
So back to your point, we just have to be much more specific about how do we get into things and how do we be bulldogs? How do we be dogged about chasing after the actual cause of the damn thing? Let's get to it.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course. After I could maybe challenge you somehow in saying that I do have quite a few friends that are doctors, and most of them are GPs, and they're um, one of the main problems they face every day is time constraints.
totally.
And when they have so many patients to see in that one day, and they only have those 12, 14 hours to see all of those people, then they do have time constraints. They can't escape, and they can only see a patient for this amount of time. And often so they're very frustrated because they would like to see the patient for 30, 40 minutes, an hour, and have a deep
Yeah,
discussion, and really try to help that person, but they only have 10 minutes per patient. So I think it
totally.
is also why there are so many issues right now with the system. When you said the system is breaking down, I think that is also
Mhm.
part of the problem, is that I think a lot of doctors would love to spend more time with their patients, because at the beginning they do this because they want to help people. So
Right.
I think they would like to do it, but are not able to because of those types of problems they face on a daily basis.
I don't know any MD who went to school to push pills.
Yeah.
They all go bright-eyed, bushy-tailed.
Yeah.
Every single MD is like, oh, awesome. I'm going to get to solve complicated problems. I'm going to get to help people.
Yeah.
Brilliant. We want you in medical school. That's great. But you're right. There's this old saying that the cage makes the beast.
Mm.
And I think that's really where a lot of doctors find themselves now. They go through medical school, and medical school can be fun, and you're like, oh, this is great. I'm learning a lot. It's challenging. I love this.
Mm.
And you're still pretty bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then you get into residency, and the grind starts. And especially, I know the U.S. I don't really know how it is abroad so much. And residency often is a very rude awakening
Oh yeah.
for young doctors, and they're like, "Oh my God, like I have so many demands on my time. Everyone needs something.
Mm.
The system is overwhelmed." And they start to actually put rubber on the road, and they really start to learn their toolkits. It goes from the theory to the practicum. And all their, mentor physicians say, oh, someone has high blood pressure, you give them this. If someone has a staph infection, you give them this. And you learn all of that to the nth degree with all the variables, all the pieces. But what you're really doing is you're learning a very complicated set of algorithms.
Yep.
It's actually quite rare in residency to be challenged intellectually. There's a lot of data absorption,
Mm-hmm.
but there's not a lot of critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a saying I came across recently that said that MDs are not primarily selected for intelligence; they're primarily selected for obedience.
Mm.
Again, they're running very, very complicated algorithms,
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about it that way. Yeah.
and that's in place. The reason medicine functions like that is because of all the time constraints.
Mm-hmm.
It is efficient.
Mm-hmm.
It's because we're trying to do a public health good over an individual health good. It's a statistical product. If you have healthcare paid for by the government or by an insurance company, they're telling you what you can do for your patients because those are all population products, not individual products.
Yeah.
And so, but doctors didn't really go to school for that. Doctors went to share with an individual and care about an individual. And this is the reason that I got out of conventional practice and started my own practice, because I quickly saw that I wouldn't be able to practice medicine the way that I was called to do while someone else was telling me what I get paid for and doesn't get paid for,
Yeah.
don't get paid for.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're exactly right. The whole system is organized in a way that doesn't really lend itself to deep healing. It does kind of cover up. It does an acceptable job across the entire population. acceptable. If you look at the statistics in the US, that's a questionable statement.
Yeah.
It is barely acceptable.
And then I think today it's been like this for many years, but I think we're coming to kind of a pinnacle there. But then if you add in pharmaceutical companies and the profitability of that, then people become numbers that equal profit. And if you see it in that way, then you come to a point where it's, I think they really believe it's more profitable to have sick people, but for the society, it's actually more profitable to have people in good shape and in good
Of
health.
course, right?
So I think
Yeah,
it's really it's kind of the wrong way around right now, because it's just those pharmaceutical companies are, they have a lot of power, I think, over a lot of things. And so it's quite dangerous
absolutely.
to see it that way. And that's also why there's all this pill pushing. And I think in America, it's a lot more than it is here in Europe. It's a little bit
Mm,
different, but still, it's because these, as you said, MD see a symptom and they treat it with a pill. And that is because they are being pushed by the pharmaceutical companies also to do it that way, because it's easier to have people, or it's more profitable at least, to have people on 10 pills a day for 30 years. So,
yeah. Well, there's certainly a lot of regulatory capture.
mm,
There's also a lot of a lack of imagination. This is just the way it goes, and people are very scared to rock the
yeah,
boat. They're like, "Well, is the alternative worse?"
yeah,
In the U.S., we were just talking over on my channel earlier this week. I don't know if this news made it so much to Europe, but there was this young fellow who assassinated a insurance CEO,
yes, yes, I heard about this.
and one can understand this fellow's in one sense one can understand this fellow's sort of dissatisfaction, because the insurance companies, like the pharmaceutical industry, are part of why our system is in such bad shape.
Yeah,
Lots of bad incentives, obviously. I think that's misguided. I think the idea of assassinating the CEO doesn't solve the
no,
problem,
of
and the guy
course.
was a father and all these things, which is horrible. But I think a lot of Americans saw that and they kind of went, maybe that kid's onto something. And the fact that they thought that is like, hey, we're in trouble, guys. Our system really sucks.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Uh,
So it's very challenging. And oftentimes people ask me, they're like, hey, doc, how do we fix our medical system? And it's a big, complicated policy thing. And I don't pretend to be a politician. If you're going to take a multi-trillion-dollar industry, just in the US, the healthcare industry is like $5 trillion or something insane.
mm,
And there are all these giant corporations that get a cut of that. So many incentives to keep it the way it is.
exactly. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I don't want to try and change that system.
Mm,
I want to sidestep that system.
hmm.
I like to build parallel systems. Opma Clinic and this type of healthcare is just an option to the side.
Yeah.
My sense is that that's a sinking ship,
Yep.
and that will accelerate.
Yeah.
There's a hole in the hole. The water's coming in. It's only going to get scarier. The Titanic is on its way out.
Mm,
I just want to have a lifeboat over here. I want to have something where people can go, hey, I want genuine healthcare that thinks about me as a human being, rather than what is the statistical norm, and 80% of people benefit from this
uh,
drug, so it's going to work for you. Right? It's
yeah.
like, no, I don't want
And
that. I want to figure out 100% what works for you.
yeah, and I think that is, generally the case with our societies today, and how the world is functioning right now, is that the problem is there is all of this polarization, for e- at every level, on every level, for all populations around the planet, is that everything has to be black or white, but
Right.
there could actually be, something blue on the side that is really interesting. So
Yeah.
I think for everything, if you know um I mean, political views, all of the healthcare systems and everything, it shouldn't be like, do you love it or do you hate it, or are you for
Right.
or against? It should be, well, there is this option, but then we have something alternative that maybe you would prefer. And I think if there were more alternatives given for everything, people could feel like they have the choice, to do what they
Mhm.
wish to do and not be pressured to choose a side and to be against something, but more to feel like they're for something. And I think that is what is missing today a lot.
Yeah, nuance is great, but it's hard to systematize.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is.
That's the trouble in medicine. The idea about the old guard having to die to be changed is a matter of system and incentives. It is, do we want to change this system? And again, I would put forward to my fellow MDs and DOs and other physicians, don't worry about this system. Take the risk,
Mhm.
the business risk. I get it, right? A lot of doctors have golden handcuffs. It's like, hey, you get paid a lot of money to do the thing,
Mm,
but you hate the thing.
mm,
And you know the thing isn't what your patients want.
mm.
So, break those shackles and build something parallel.
Yeah.
You're right. As the old guard passes away, this system may gradually be able to have some change, but we don't have to wait for that. We can literally just build a parallel system right now.
Of
And
course.
Optimal Clinic is very much an example of that. I do think, of course, we go to medical school, not business school. I think a lot of people who think the way I do philosophically about medicine, it's not uncommon for people to start an integrative or functional medicine clinic. The average lifespan of a functional or integrated medicine clinic is 2 years.
Hmm.
Why is that? It's not because the medicine is poor.
Hmm.
It's because these guys are trying to do a business and they didn't go to business school.
Yeah.
And so it's a challenge. It'd be nice if our system propped that up, but right now it's still the Wild West. It's still hard work. It's still risk. And, I like to have conversations like this because it always reminds me that we are starting to see more people jump ship from this and patronize this. And I hope that MDs see this and they're like, man, there seems to be a lot of people who want this medicine. Maybe I could try that too.
Yeah.
To which I would say, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have to your point, like, how do we change the system? We can wait and pray and, oh gosh, maybe we'll get there. Or we can just do the damn thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, and just give an alternative to people.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that, because we have built such an individualistic society in the West, I think it's really, people are, especially since COVID, because we were in this, completely kind of out of body experience where we were all isolated and we didn't really know where everything, what was happening,
Yeah. That was an interesting
how it
time.
was going to end. And I think there was a shift in people's, in some sense, in how
Yeah.
they view themselves and how they view themselves in relation to others and what is actually important. And I think
Yeah.
even if we have come back to, some bad habits, I think there is still something that stays in the mind about that time and what we experienced at that moment and how people recognize the importance of being seen and heard and understood, and the relationships, how important that is. And so I think that mind shift could, well, does lead more people to think about how they approach their own health and who they want their doctor to be. So I think this is something that
Yeah.
people are going to in a natural way because they want to be heard and seen.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Crisis creates opportunity.
oh,
We saw the need for change.
yeah.
And I like that term awakening. People say that COVID was an awakening in a lot of different ways.
Mm,
I think people woke up to a lot of propaganda.
mm.
They woke up to a lot of systems that aren't working in their favor, that have a lot of bad incentives. In so many different ways, there was this big change in collective consciousness.
Mhm.
And I agree. I think people feel that in a really deep way. And everyone is kind of looking around going, okay, we all agree. So who's going to do something about this?
Yeah, yeah, sure. No, but I think it's a good thing that I hope, like you said, I hope other MDs see this and that it gives them, little spark to do something and to go maybe a more alternative way. I wanted to touch upon upon research because I
Sure.
think that a lot of the issues you're having in your work comes from the lack of funding and research, because if that was
Yeah.
pumped up a bit and if there was a lot more research done, a lot more funding, then you wouldn't be left with treating people without having the answers to treat them. And so I think there's a huge connection between the research field and what you're trying to bring to your patients.
100%.
And there is what I don't know exactly what the situation is in America, but I know that worldwide there is a huge problem with the funding of research for chronic illnesses and autoimmune illnesses. So what is your point of view on that, and what do you experience in America regarding research?
Yeah. Um, I'll speak for what I see in America, and correct me if this doesn't translate to what's happening in Europe, but I suspect it's fairly much the
Yeah.
same thing. Um, I think one of the troubles is that research has become a career. And what do I mean by that? I mean that people go into research and then they still have to put bread on their tables for their children.
Mm-hmm.
If you look back in the 1900s, a lot of research was done as a hobby, essentially.
Yeah.
There were people who were independently wealthy for whatever reason, and they said, hey, I made this wonderful new thing. I'm going to release it for free to humanity, explicitly make it non-patentable, because I want the clout and the glory and, to serve humanity.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of good reasons for a lot of these folks. And they didn't really care about the money. They didn't need to turn a profit on it.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, research is heavily driven by the money. And there's a lot of different intersections on this.
Yeah, of course.
First of all, the individual researchers are incentivized to perform safe research.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to spend 5 years of my life trying to put bread on the table, and I'm a researcher, right? I have to find a research project that can safely do that. I can't take the gamble. I can't be like, oh, I'm going to look at some novel theory that nobody else has done and hope that someone funds me for it.
Yeah, yeah.
People hate writing grants. It's incredibly demoralizing.
Mm-hmm.
It is a whole hated field.
Yeah.
Sorry if there's anybody out there who loves writing grants. You're the exception. I love you. Good. Someone's got to get into it. But so people tend to select for safe research. They're much, much, much more likely to research something that adds one sheet of paper onto a massive stack of established theorems and ideas
Mm-hmm.
than they are to try and start a new stack of theorems.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously our system isn't working. More of the same is not going to solve our problems, guys. We don't need more medicines.
Yeah.
We don't need an antihypertensive that has 2% improved efficacy.
Yeah.
That doesn't solve our problem. We need fundamental research. And certainly in America, research, so who's giving those grant dollars? The answer is usually pharmaceutical industries.
Yeah, well, that was what I was going to say, because I did some research on antibiotic resistance and how that has increased so much also in these past years. I think also when you look into that resistance that has been building up in the past few years, but the fact that there is almost no research done in finding new antibiotics to help people. I think it has mainly to do with the fact that pharmaceutical companies have very low profitability on finding new antibiotics, so they don't really push any funding in that. But this is something I know that in a lot of chronic illnesses would help to have, new antibiotics to help too.
And to push even further on that, even further afield, more to the point and less fundable, why don't we do research looking at why people need all these antibiotics?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
What is the underlying ecological change in the human being that makes them so susceptible to all these infections that we need to hammer people with antibiotics?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so a lot of this research is now done on small scale by individual physicians.
Yeah.
Right? People in functional integrated medicine are all physician innovators.
Yeah.
Because they have to be. Because I look at someone who has a childhood history of getting amoxicillin or augmentin every, twice a year for acute otitis media, for instance. And I look at that and I go, okay, well, hang on. How has that changed your tissue? Your ecological system is now vulnerable to invasive species, essentially, to pull an analogy from biology, ecological biology.
Yeah.
And it turns out that that's actually incredibly germane to the question. If we hammer someone with all these antibiotics, they're local biome changes.
Hmm.
And that actually should be the first layer of defense, it turns out.
Yep.
Not only that, not having your native biome means that the mucosa doesn't regenerate the same way because it's not getting the signals that it evolutionarily adapted to
Hmm.
from the expected biota.
Hmm.
So, so there are all these many, many more fundamental questions that are very hard to get research dollars to because all of this is essentially unpatentable.
Yeah.
The solutions to these are things like, well, don't allow there to be chronic biofilm built up in your sinuses. Well, how do you do that? Routine saline rinses. There's no money in that.
No.
No pharmaceutical industry is like, yeah, we're going to patent salt water. And a lot of these solutions are very, naturalistic, and they genuinely make a huge change.
Mm.
So, what does that leave us with? Well, I suppose in theory, it leaves us with the government, funding research into these unpatentable, unprofitable ideas that, would solve and improve sort of public health outcomes, which they're very interested in. In the US, we have this department, the NIH, which in theory should be doing this, but it's largely captured by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
RFK Jr., who presumably will be taking over the head
Yeah.
of as head of Health and Human Services, has a very, very interesting sort of discussion on how he's going to change the rationing of research dollars and say, well, hey, if pharma wants to spend money on those drugs, they're private industries, they can do what they want, but the government's going to fund this stuff.
Hmm.
So that's somewhat exciting. I mean, it's hard to trust any politician. Hopefully it's not talk. Hopefully they can be
I would
done.
say so. Yeah. Now, I really think that how politics work and um, how the changes in government work in the different countries is also um, really difficult to get things done, because if you're
Yeah,
changing, everyone that is making the big decisions, if you're changing all of those people every 4 or 5 years, if you have something that, you know in research, for example, that should be going on for 8, 9 years,
right.
then
Yeah, yeah,
then
right.
it's you
Absolutely.
always get cut off in the middle, and then you don't have
Yeah.
anymore because the new government decided not to fund that research. So I think
Uh,
that's also, I mean, yeah, that is really
Good point.
something that is the leadership changes are really difficult to manage for, for the research field, because every time, new decisions are made, they have to change what they're going to do. So it doesn't
Totally.
get to the end of things. But
And it incentivizes that safe research,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
right? They're like, well, what's the thing that won't rock the boat, but will still put bread on my table?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because in the end, we're all just humans trying to get through life and to survive and
Yeah.
to, feed our kids. So I mean, it's that's
Mhm,
also a
mhm.
very human way to go about things. Um,
And,
yeah, go on.
and we could compete with this whole mammoth, gargantuan leviathan over here. We could do that. We can compete with it. Or again, we can just go parallel.
Yeah,
And, I like to bang the table on that.
yeah,
On our channel, I'm always talking about how to do this successfully, how to look for physicians who are doing this, how to get connected into a parallel system. Because when we do that, we're actually fixing this problem. We are siphoning money from this system and we're walking it over here and
yeah,
saying, hey, independent researchers, independent physicians, let's patronize those people so that this starts to just wane away. We don't have to compete with it. We don't have to be loud and angry and try and
yeah.
topple the system. Because again, there are trillions of dollars of adversarial energy
Of
there.
course, of course.
That's not going to go anywhere healthy.
No, of course.
But individuals can choose to go somewhere where they're going to get a good return for their investment. They're going to put money towards something that actually gets them a nice result. And if you cut out all of the bureaucracy and middle managers, it turns out this is actually fairly cheap to do. That's the
Yeah,
reality of it.
yeah. But then I wanted to know, because this is, I mean, all of this idea is really great. And I mean, building an alternative or parallel system that may be better for mankind is really good. But the reality is also that this costs money for the patient. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you approach that problem? Because I know I've been talking to people who have the money to go private, and
Mm-hmm.
they can choose to try out all the different things that
Hmm.
are offered.
Hmm.
And so they have this whole palette of treatments in front of them, and because they have the money to do it. And then I've been talking to people who have no money and who are feeling very alone,
Yeah, yeah.
because no one is offering any help. And so, how do you find a middle ground in that? And how do you see those issues with people who don't have the resources to come and be with you and be helped by you?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is the reason that I try to do as much social media as I can, because it's free education.
Hmm.
Ultimately ultimately we pay for a service and we pay for our health, either with money or with time.
Hmm.
My hope is that if we produce a lot of social media, a lot of education, and there are many, many wonderful people who speak about all these topics. There's so much good information out there. This is why I love when people do their own research, because increasingly there are good sources of information. And so you can just spend time to actually, get phenomenal medicine. Now you're right, there's still a lot of access difficulties. Let's say someone needs, an order for a pharmaceutical or an order for a lab test. That is still quite difficult for people
Hmm.
to access. But there are even people building parallel ways to access all of those.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people are very worried about the private cost of these because they haven't actually looked into what those cost. They're used to the sort of bloated costs of the typical system.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll give you a simple example. We're able to run blood tests for literally a 100th of what hospitals here run them for.
Hmm.
And so people are like, oh my God, I'm going to run lab tests. I'm going to go broke. It's like, well, that's especially in America, this is
Yeah.
just due to a bunch of complex corporate
Yeah.
nonsense games financially between the insurance company and the hospitals and yada yada.
Yeah.
The actual cost for all of those is very cheap.
Mhm.
And so again, a lot of that is just education. How do we connect people with good ideas they can research on their own time? And how do they connect with a cost efficient service? And then do those cost efficient physicians, researchers, services, are they able to have a network of cheap labs, cheap pharmaceuticals, those sort of stuff? And that's all, again, increasingly kind of happening.
Yeah.
The more that people vote with their wallets, if you will, the more that all capitalizes and becomes a real and more broadly accessible thing. There's more competition. It
Yeah.
drives down price.
Yeah.
So I do think we're getting there. And I see social media and all this sort of free education that myself and other wonderful physicians are putting out there as a really, really good entry point for people.
Yeah. So you would advocate for I mean, just for the people who really don't have the funds to go, because I have spoken with someone 2 days ago who told me, well, her husband, she is bedbound and her husband lost his
Mm.
job,
Yeah.
and I think she's 32, and she has these tests she really needs to do because she has
Mm.
POTS,
Oh.
and she suspects MCAS. And so
Hmm.
she really wanted to go through, series of tests and something to see if this was really the problem at hand. And she just doesn't have the funds because her husband lost his job and she doesn't have insurance anymore. And so she said, well,
Hmm.
I can't even go to my GP right now, because,
Hmm.
I just can't pay for it. So for those people in those situations, because there are so many, I mean, there are millions of people in that situation too, would you really encourage self management and trying to educate yourself through the social media and trying to find solutions? Because I know most of these people are also on groups on Facebook and trying to help each other, which is really great because there is loads of really good information out there. But then there's also
You're
not
right.
so good information or
Yeah.
dangerous information, but people
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
so distressed that sometimes they go down some paths that aren't, the best, and that can be dangerous for them. So
Great point.
what would you say to those people who are in this distress and they don't know what to do to
Mm-hmm.
prevent them from going down a potentially dangerous path?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And to the broader point first, and then to your specific question later. Um, you make the right point here on why there is urgency in attacking this system, rather than just kind of waiting for the slow trickle. And ultimately, I will advocate for anything that gets the job done. generally my sense is that this is kind of the action plan for most people, and this is moving the needle. But you're exactly right. There are a lot of people who are in that situation whom we really do kind of want to throttle the government and the corporations and say, like, come on, let's get this crap done because there's people who are suffering.
Mm,
Um, and how do we do that? A lot of that also, though, is education. It is challenging MDs and physicians and the system and saying, hey, obviously this isn't working, nor is it cost efficient.
mhm,
Why don't we broaden our scope and get to a public health service that thinks more broadly?
mhm,
So, yes, I definitely agree with that point. Um, how we do that, I don't know.
mm,
I'm open to collaborating with people who have ideas on that. Part of what I'm doing is I am moving into a phase in my career where I am educating other physicians. I am taking apprentices. I am training people because ultimately there's only some people that I can personally see in a day. And so I'm training NPs and MDs to do excellent medicine and then distributing them out.
mhm.
Uh, we need more of that. We need more doctors who are trying to figure out how do we accelerate all of that.
Yeah, sure. And so yeah, just to have your insight on this, but what would you say to those people that don't really know uh, what to do, and that could put themselves in harm's way in some, with some trials or
Yeah,
some weird,
yeah.
you know.
Um, Certainly, if you can find a physician who is doing charity care or pro bono work in this field, and a lot of doctors will have some set of their schedule set aside for that.
Hmm.
So that's certainly something it was worth asking. Again, most of the doctors who are going in these parallel systems are there for the right reason.
Yeah.
They want to help people, they want to heal people, and it's not that uncommon that they reserve a portion of their schedule for charity care and say, like, hey, I really feel for you, let's try and figure this out. So that's, definitely think about that. Ask the question.
Yeah.
You miss every shot you don't take. Doesn't hurt to ask, right?
Oh yeah, and sending an
And
email is not that difficult to do. It
yeah,
doesn't cost anything. So yeah.
right. I myself do a lot of charity care for that exact reason, because we have these people who are like, oh my gosh, okay, what can we do?
Mm,
And especially if people are engaged in their own research, oftentimes they're pretty near. They're pretty near to the answer already.
mhm,
And the reality is that a lot of this can be done clinically without having to get expensive labs.
mhm,
We can set up clinical experimentation or trials where we say, okay, this person has POTS. It sounds like this is a central nervous system variation of POTS. Have you tried X, Y, and Z? Okay, what was the result of those?
mhm,
Okay, therefore try A.
mhm,
So there's a lot of that can be done without sort of confirmatory testing, because the reality is that, back in the day, before the sort of expansion of laboratory testing, physicians, they really relied on clinical testing.
mhm.
Rather famously, since the Middle Ages, doctors knew diabetes based on the smell of urine,
Yeah. Yep.
right?
Yep.
Right. Diabetes mellitus
Yep.
is the technical name, which means, honey.
Yep.
Honey smelling urine.
Yep.
And so there's a lot that can be done without relying on relatively inefficient labs.
Mhm.
So there are kind of a lot of ways to get in between all of these different things. And on the best forums, on the best social media channels, physicians are going to be equipping people with the idea, well, look at A, look at B, look at C.
Mhm.
I always recommend that people think about themselves as an individual. Just because something worked for someone else, it does not mean it will work for this other person.
Yep.
There's nuance. That is the value of working with an individual physician,
Mhm.
because they're going to know you and work with you and help you understand that. But it is accomplishable for people so long as they're, again, able to take the time and be patient and think about all the variables. It's a challenging situation, for sure.
Yeah.
But I love that more information is coming out for people.
Yeah. And I think social media is helping so much with this. I mean, this is what
Yeah.
I'm all about on my channel. And this is why I wanted to shine some light upon that and give a voice to those people who feel a little bit unheard. So this is,
And thank you for doing it. It's a beautiful service.
and it's something I hope is going to bring some attention to the conversation, to the topic, and then also bring some love to the people who need it at home to feel understood, and to, through interviews like I'm doing with you, also to get some new ideas and to try to find other ways to go about things and not to stay stuck in a system that doesn't work for them. So
Yeah.
this is really it's really to the point. I just wanted to wrap things up by knowing if there was any, because I think the message for, your fellow doctors is to try new things and not to be scared
Yeah.
to go a different way than what the system is pushing you to do. So yeah, that's the one. But what about people who are watching this who are chronically ill? What would be your message for them in this episode?
Mm-hmm. Try to vet practitioners. I think one of the central struggles that people have, whether they're on social media reading people's experiences or they're trying to find a functional medicine provider or integrative medicine provider, it is challenging to find people who genuinely know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Your point, right? It's like, how do we vet good information versus bad information? Um, and there's a lot of variety. This is all a completely unregulated field, for better and for worse, right now. Any, dare I say this, probably any practitioner worth their salt is going to give you a free consultation, right? If they're not just in it for the money, they're going to give you a free consultation. Challenge them.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge them. Say, hey, I did this research. What do you think about that? And see how they react. If they go, oh, this is great. Okay, let's talk about it. You're probably talking to someone who's genuinely interested in your health.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go, this is not what you probably don't want to hang out with that person because they have their blinders on.
Yeah.
You want someone who's going to see you. You want a warmth from your physician. You want a connection. You want a fit. That's another good sign.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you're on forums and you're like, okay, I'm on a POTS forum. I have POTS. There's all this information. Ask questions, connect with people, challenge them.
Mm.
And again, people who are giving you good information are open to challenge. They're there for the right reason. And so say, hey, this is my individual situation. How might you approach this? Or what do you make of that? And if they blow you off, it's probably not the right idea for you, or that person doesn't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And if they engage with you, then it's more likely that you're going to be able to get in line with something that is useful for you. You're going to feel more empowered. Fundamentally, I would like everyone to feel empowered. How do we make more of those resources? If there's anybody out there who has ideas, networking on how to get people more empowered, Lisa, I love this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
We need to do this. We need to build resources for people.
Yeah.
We need to create reliable resources for people.
Yeah.
But right now, it's still kind of the Wild West. So everybody just go out there, be skeptics. That's appropriate. Warm-hearted skeptics.
Yeah.
Challenge people and see where we can all get. And let's keep on evolving.
So if people want to find you and to find your how you can help, which social media are you on? What are the handles on the different socials?
Yeah, so we produce most things on YouTube, and we're at the Atma MD, TheAtmaMD, the Atma MD. We also keep some Facebook and some Instagram, but we produce most of our materials on YouTube.
Okay, great. Well, I was really so happy to have this conversation with you, and I'm so thankful you took the time for me and for the channel. And I'm sure this conversation will spark conversation and will also help people in maybe rethinking what they have been through in the system and how they can change things for the better for themselves. So thank you so much, Dr. Sandal.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm thankful to you for setting this up. I really do hope, like you said, that this creates a sense of empowerment for people, that it helps them go, okay, hang on, there are physicians out there. Let me find my guy. Here's how I vet resources. And hopefully this does spark a bigger conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Lisa, pleasure to be here. Take good care.
Thanks. Thank you so much for watching this episode of The Unheard. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to get more of that. And check out the description of the video and the links in my bio to see how you can help with the research. See you soon.